Canada's Ancaster, Ontario, April 2013, 32 years old. Tim Bosma was browsing the internet for his truck's advertisement. Tim worked as a contractor, was a devoted husband and father, and was active in his neighborhood church. He and his spouse, Charlene, had a daughter who was 2 years old, and they were undoubtedly considering having another child. Actually, they intended to adopt as well as have 4 children. They were already in contact with reproductive clinics, but they were always thinking about money. Paycheck to paycheck, they were struggling, and they were now considering downsizing. Although they knew they would be happy wherever they moved with their expanding family, it would be painful to leave the acreage they had purchased before getting engaged and had constructed themselves. Although the advertisement had been up for a few weeks and had received little attention, Tim's primary goal was to sell his vehicle and get something a little less expensive and simpler to maintain. At last, he received a call from 2 quiet new males in the region. Perfect. He was eager to look at it and hoped to be getting rid of it at last. They indicated they would arrive on May 6th after Tim set up a test drive with them over the phone. "Shall I accompany them?" At 9 p.m., Charlene said, "Yes, you should, because we want the truck to come back," to Tim's question. Tim was nervously pacing the house. He questioned Charlene. "Who comes this late to see a truck?" "Who knows, but at least someone was paying attention." At last, Tim opened the door for the potential purchasers. Charlene and their neighbor were outside when Tim said he would be right back, and they watched as the 3 of them climbed into the vehicle. She and her neighbor were both uneasy about the encounter. There was something strange about the men's behavior that made her nervousness go to the back of her mind. Charlene climbed back into the vehicle and watched it accelerate off. Now that it was much longer than she had anticipated, Charlene was beginning to feel anxious. Why are they taking so long, and why now? Had they fallen apart? Tim's phone was undoubtedly charged before he went, so he would have phoned her. He wasn't picking up when she phoned him. She took up the phone and shakily dialed 911, feeling nauseated. Charlene provided the police with some descriptions when they arrived at their remote home. Both individuals were in their mid to late 20s and were Caucasian. One was slender, about 6 feet tall, with short brown hair, dressed in blue pants and an orange shirt with long sleeves. The second was shorter, more smaller, and much thinner. He had a red hooded sweatshirt pulled over his head and had black hair. According to her, they felt it was strange that they had come by foot since their residence was rather remote and not close to a major road, so it seemed strange to go so far. The taller of the 2 guys seemed courteous and talkative, but the other man was not. He was just looking about and not interacting with anybody. Inquisitive detectives began searching for Tim's vehicle, a black 2007 Dodge Ram pickup. After 24 hours, they had already followed up on over 300 leads and established a hotline dedicated to Tim's case. According to some CCTV, Tim's truck was being followed by a smaller car as it left his residence. It happened at 10:22 p.m. However, the video was poor and they were unable to read the license plate. When Mary Bosma spoke about her missing son, she found it difficult to contain her emotions. She said that having him back at home was her Mother's Day desire. At last, someone who believed they had encountered the 2 random individuals in very similar situations gave them a clue. Lucas Bate was the name on the burner phone that had been used to contact Tim. They had heard about another guy named Igor from their chats. The same phone number had also been used to reach Igor about his vehicle. Before making a purchase, the 2 guys wanted to test drive it. Eagle sat in the passenger seat and read. While one of the guys was driving, Eagle observed the man's unique wrist tattoo, which said ambition. Eagle, who weighed 170 pounds and was 6 feet 1 inch, spoke about his Army days throughout the journey. Eagle had been asked what he had done in the Army by the guy in the back seat. The 2 guys drove his vehicle back after he said, "You don't want to know." They never came back or spoke to him about it again. Because of his more thorough explanation, the police were able to run the tattoo information through their computers and look up the booking images of local residents with criminal histories. A guy who had previously been charged with narcotics possession and driving while intoxicated appeared. Delon Millard, at 27 years old, was the chief executive officer of Millard Air Limited, his family's aviation company, which was established in 1963 by his grandpa Carl and run by Diane's father Wayne until his passing in November 2012. The firm started out as an airline before becoming into an airline services provider. The Millards had a distinguished history in Ontario's aviation sector and, at 14, were unquestionably a highly strong family, even if they declared bankruptcy in the 1990s. Delon seemed to be carrying on his father's and grandfather's legacy, displaying a tremendous deal of aptitude and potential. On the same day, he became the youngest Canadian to fly an aircraft and a helicopter alone. Since he was the only kid, his parents reportedly lavished him with attention in addition to the company. His family had a variety of interests and homes around Toronto. Delon took costly lessons and hobbies, attended exclusive schools, and had extravagant vacations. He had nothing to want. He became a thrill seeker as he grew older. He enjoyed off-road racing, skydiving, and purchasing automobiles and trucks just to crash and destroy them. Over the years, Delon had held a number of jobs. He had studied animation, taken photography classes, and trained as a chef, but nothing had truly stayed. He knew that he could just leave and not worry about the money, so he was never going to remain in a job he didn't like. The same was true of college, which he left very abruptly. He began stealing, which quickly grew into a much larger enterprise, always looking for that feeling of adrenaline. In order to get into and out of different criminal situations, he would organize heists with his buddies using his money and connections. Del's crew was involved in narcotics trafficking, arson, and spree stealing, among other things. Delon would quickly spend his parents' money on extravagant parties, hard drugs, and a variety of items, including firearms, rocket launchers, jet skis, and customized automobiles. He was the kind of person who always wanted more and more of everything. Nothing ever satisfied his cravings. Money was never a problem, therefore he didn't need to steal anything. All he was doing was it for the excitement. According to friends, he seemed to have a god complex. I believe he saw everything as a game. According to an old friend, he was just really fortunate. The majority of the family's assets were now in Dion's control after the death of his father at the end of 2012. The airplane hangars owned by Millard Air and Mard Properties Limited were no longer used for the aviation industry. Instead, they were used by him to store narcotics, firearms, and stolen goods. He told folks he was beginning a pet cremation company and requested one of his buddies to construct him an incinerator. Then he placed an order for a second, more larger one that he could carry about. The eliminator cost more than $115,000 to create and alter. Delon was located by police, who informed him that they were there due of Tim's absence. Calmly, he answered. Detectives didn't find anything immediately damning at Igor's house except from the tattoo he described, which I assumed you were going to reveal. In any case, they placed him under observation. Their only solid lead was this one. His phone was shortly discovered to have been bouncing off the identical mobile phone towers as the burn-app phone that was used to call Eagle and Tim. They followed him around the streets, saw him take out significant sums of money from the bank, and met a guy who matched Eagle and Charlene's description of the second individual. It was simple to identify this individual, Mark Smitch, who had a lengthy criminal history. He was placed under monitoring as well. Officers followed Diane in his SUV a few days after Tim Bosma vanished. They arrested him on suspicion of theft and forced detention after enclosing him in their automobiles while brandishing their firearms. He was carrying the keys to Tim Bosma's vehicle, some black gloves that were sent off for testing, and $3,000 in cash. Tim's missing vehicle was eventually located by police in Kleinburg, Ontario, on May 12, 2013. It was parked on Meline Diane's mother's land in a trailer that belonged to Diane. Despite the fact that the car had been totally dismantled and painted, forensic examination revealed copious quantities of blood, a few fingerprints, and gunshot residue. As a result, they came to a terrible realization. Tim's bones were discovered burned beyond recognition in a massive incinerator on a different location connected to Delon. Delamard was quickly accused of first-degree murder, which he denied, and his confidant Mark Smith's trial became more intense. Police started looking into the Mards' many homes and property parcels. All three of Millard Air's hangars at Ouattara International Airport were searched. They also confiscated Diane's equipment, which provided proof of a clear connection to Mark. In reality, Mark was one of Diane's most trusted friends. Despite the stark contrast between his upbringing and Diane's, they had a lot in common and had become friends. Delon, whom Mark had first met in 2008, had a lengthy criminal past as a regular user of cocaine, LSD, and oxycodone. Initially serving as Dee's drug dealer, Mark soon gained Diane's confidence and became engaged in his many crimes and heists. Delon often gave Mark and his fiancée Marina free stays in his houses in exchange for Mark working on some of his properties. Delon even pledged to construct a studio for Mark, who wanted to become a rapper. The black gloves that were discovered with Delon included DNA from Tim Bosmer, his girlfriend Christina, and Delon himself. Delon was also connected to the fingerprints that were discovered on Tim's vehicle. On their phones, Delon and Mark were chatting about stealing a vehicle and scheduling many test drives with various individuals. They discovered Tim's advertisement online after all of these failed in April. Delon and Mark, two already remorseless criminals who had escaped detection for years, had no intention of paying for the vehicle and were determined to steal it in any manner possible, according to the police chronology. Delon was operating Tim's vehicle as they left his home, with Mark in the rear and Tim seated in the front. They eventually stopped in a field when Tim was shot and died. The CCTV footage showed that Delon had previously parked a second automobile there. They utilized their newfound knowledge of Dell's aviation hangar's location to locate more. At 20 minutes after midnight, CCTV video from the road revealed that Tim's vehicle had something on the back now. It seemed to be heavy equipment, most likely Diane's new music incinerator. The hangar's CCTV saw Delon and Mark moving around the building before sparks emerged from the incinerator they had set on fire. After cleaning the vehicle, Tim switched the license plates with Dee's SUV. Delon texted his staff as a group the next morning, instructing them not to report to work that day. According to them, this was the first time it had ever occurred. Delon quickly had the truck repainted and the glass repaired from where the bullets had shattered it. When everybody returned to work, one of the employees spotted the newly done-up truck. He recognized the model from the media coverage of Tim's disappearance and took some photos. He couldn't stop thinking about Charlene's pleas for her husband's safe return. It was really playing on his mind, so he phoned Crim Stoppers to ask if this could be the truck they were looking for. When they confirmed it was, he ran outside and threw up. He knew what this meant, but also he now knew what Delon was really capable of. So he held back on telling Crim Stoppers where the truck was until he was certain everyone else would be safe. He bravely confronted Delon, but Delon denied everything, saying it had been a legitimate purchase and a pure coincidence that it looked the same. But this conversation had clearly rattled Dee, as on May 9th he asked his girlfriend Christina to help him move the truck to his mother's using his trailer. They moved the incinerator too when Mark Smith found out that Delon had been arrested. He called a mutual friend and asked him to start getting rid of the drugs and weapons in Delon's home. The mutual friend phoned a second person asking him to help too, but this friend did not feel good about it, but agreed to drop things to Mark anyway. While in the car, he turned on the radio. The news was right in the middle of an ongoing case. Tim Bosma went missing, and now their main suspect, Delon Millard, has been arrested. In a hurry, he spun the automobile around right away. Additionally, Mark Smith was taken into custody and accused of killing Tim Bosma. He entered a not guilty plea. Additionally, Delon's girlfriend Christina, 21, was charged with accessory after the fact. Now that Delon was in jail, they began reviewing two other cases that they now suspected were connected to him. Police have reportedly restarted the inquiry in the meantime. The first was the disappearance of Mallard's ex-girlfriend, Laura Babcock, who was 23 years old and characterized as a free spirit. Her gregarious and self-assured nature made it unsurprising that her aim was to become an actress. She was easy to get along with and would check in with you many times a day since she was so addicted to her phone. It was out that Laura and Delane had dated from 2008 to 2009. Even after their breakup, they continued to be in one another's lives and sometimes slept together. Thereafter, Laura began seeing a guy named Shaw who was quite different from Delane. He was a really hard worker, quiet and trustworthy. Christina, Diane's new girlfriend, reportedly wasn't thrilled when she learned that Delane and Laura were still communicating. Despite their final breakup, Laura and Shaw continued to feel deeply for one another. He purchased her an iPad, kept in constant contact with her, and even gave her a party for her 22nd birthday, inviting Christina and Delane as well. When the summer of 2012 arrived, Laura was going through a more difficult period. She had not truly established somewhere, was always on the move, used drugs, and sometimes worked as an escort to get money. One night, a woman called Jessica even saw Laura get out of a cab with her little dog and some baggage. After observing for around 15 minutes, she went across the street to inquire on her well-being. When Laura said that she had nowhere to go, Jessica asked if she would want to spend a few days at her house. Laura said that she would appreciate a little phone charge but didn't want to impose. After calling a friend to come get her, Jessica said that a tall, disheveled guy knocked on the door a few hours later. Jessica said that even though the description she provided did not fit Delane or Mark, she had a negative vibe about him right away. "Get and get in the car," he replied, turning to Laura. Jessica begged Laura remain with her since she was so uncomfortable. When Jessica awoke the next morning, Laura had cleaned her whole apartment as a token of appreciation. Laura and Jessica exchanged phone numbers, gave each other hugs, and bid each other farewell on June 30th, 2012. Laura never returned, and Jessica didn't hear from her again. Jessica urged her to stop by whenever she could to get the remainder of her belongings, including her sunglasses, which were still on the kitchen counter. After a month, Laura had not been seen or contacted by anybody else. Unfortunately, it seems that the inquiry never got off the ground, despite the police being contacted. The individuals in her life were not asked to make any remarks. She was gone. Her phone was completely silent, and there was no sign of any movement on her bank account. She was really concerned, and he really grilled Delane about her movements, since he knew that she and Diane had been speaking often in the days and hours leading up to her disappearance. The discussion stopped when Delane stated he didn't know, adding that she had just contacted him in search of narcotics and that he hadn't given her any. Sean should not reasonably expect to locate her, he warned him icily. Back after she vanished, Sean informed the police everything and sent them to Delane. However, they didn't talk to Delane, and it looked that her expression became cold very immediately. Police were now examining Delane's phone data from around the time Laura vanished, as he remained in bars awaiting trial for Tim's murder. A few months before to Laura's disappearance, Delane texted Mark Smith, asking how brutal he was ready to be in order to earn money. "It's next-level stuff, but I have some ideas. We'll discuss it over the weekend. You need money, I realize that." With one text that stated, "If you could keep me updated on where Laura goes, that would be of use to me." He requested his pal to track Laura and follow her around. "First, I'm going to hurt her. Then I'm going to make her leave," was the most damaging text ever sent to Christina. A few days before to Laura going missing, I would have taken her out of our life. Delane purchased a new firearm in addition to his new incinerator, the Eliminator. Maybe Laura had reached out to Delane for assistance, maybe a place to stay, and that's how she ended up with him that day, the day she disappeared. On July 3rd, around 7 p.m., Laura and Dee met up at a rail station close to one of Diane's residences, and her digital trace vanished after that time. What had become of Laura Babcock then? Although detectives were unable to determine how she died or who killed her, they thought her corpse was hidden in Dell's barn, folded up in a blue plastic sheet. Detectives were able to verify this by looking at a picture of the blue tarp that was discovered on Diane's computer. Based on how it was wrapped, It seemed like Laura was within it at the time. Laura was wrapped up and concealed for weeks, while he built up and tested his incinerator. After connecting the iPad she had given Laura to Diane's computer, he renamed it Mark's iPad and gave it to Mark Mitch on July 23rd. When the incinerator was ready, Delon texted Mark, "The barbecue has finished its warm-up and is ready for the meat." He also looked up the ideal temperature for cremation. Someone then recorded the sparks shooting from the machine as Laura's corpse burnt. A day after Laura's corpse was burnt, Mark even produced a video rapping about it, reading his rhymes on Laura's iPad. Dion's computer also included pictures of what seemed to be charred human bones inside the incinerator. Mark Smith would once again incriminate himself. Police subsequently discovered a red bag in Mark's bedroom that still held Laura's possessions. Over a year after he told his girlfriend Marina that Tim's corpse wasn't the only one they had burnt in the incinerator. Both Mark Smith and Della Mard were charged with murder a second time. Only 4 months after Laura's disappearance and 18 months prior to Tim's murder on November 29, 2012, the police reopened the second investigation. Diane's father, Wayne Mard, had been phoned by the police. In his official testimony, Diane informed the detectives that he had discovered his father dead when he entered his bedroom at 6 p.m. It seemed that he had committed himself, and a pistol was found next to his corpse. Within a week, Wayne was cremated when it was determined that he had shot himself. The airline changed all the locks and basically ran the business into the ground after Delon fired everyone. Delon informed the cops that he hadn't seen his father since the previous day at noon. He said that his father suffered from depression, alcoholism, and financial difficulties. He said that B-Bus had been struggling and that his father was now financing everything with large debts and his own cash. Many people were astonished and perplexed by the decision. Something about it hadn't quite seemed right, even if you can never really tell what a person's genuine mental condition is. In fact, Wayne had been feeling extremely good about he was an astute businessman who had a fresh strategy and was eager to restore everything to its previous state. Additionally, he was threatening to fire Delan for his careless spending and lack of assistance in managing the company. He thought that this would inspire him to alter his habits and put him in a different frame of mind. Fast-forward experts were reviewing everything once again a year later. They concluded that Wayne would not have been able to grip the rifle in a posture that made sense because it was too strange. In an attempt to replicate the gunshot residue pattern as if it had been self-inflicted, they tried rounds on 20 mannequins, but they were unsuccessful. When Diane's DNA, which was now on their system, was compared to the DNA on the pistol, the odds of it belonging to someone else were 1 in 5 quadrillion. Although Diane said he didn't go near the property until he discovered him, phone records revealed that Diane's phone traveled from Mark Mitch's home at about 1 a.m. to Wayne's house, where it remained until just after 6 a.m. Delon was accused of killing Wayne Mard. After his third not guilty plea, 2 ruthless murderers, and in Dee's case, a serial killer, were finally taken off the streets. Laura's former partner was occupied with formally complaining to the Toronto Police Service about how her case was handled and their seeming indifference to her whereabouts. He maintained that Tim and Wayne may still be alive if they had taken it seriously and done their research at the time. The prosecution initially sought justice for Tim Ozma, and the trial would start after 4 months. When Delon and Mark turned on one another and presented 2 conflicting accounts, it was not shocking. Dion said that his sole intention was to steal the vehicle, but Mark shot Tim. The prosecutor's view was that they were both involved and knew precisely what was going to happen to Tim, but Mark said that Delon was the one who altered the plan and decided he wanted the contractor killed. Throughout the trial, they made a concerted effort to hide their traces, but not with enough attention to detail. Madeline, Dell's mother, described him as a gentle boy, and said that she really thought her son was being set up. After 5 exhausting days of deliberation, the jury found both men guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced them to life in prison with the possibility of release after 25 years. Although Christina, Diane's girlfriend, acknowledged aiding Dee in destroying evidence and delaying justice, she was spared prison time by entering a guilty plea. The guys were subsequently put on trial for Laura Babcock's murder. This time, the always cocky Dalen represented himself, asserting that there was no proof Laura was dead while testifying. He was repeatedly reprimanded for his disrespectful and intimate questions during his interview with Shaw and Laura's father. They confiscated certain letters, which played a significant role in this trial. While Delan was incarcerated, he would correspond with Christina, writing, "It's a very real possibility that you will be called as a witness at my trial. Regardless of your beliefs, they must be set aside. This is what took place." Then, in an attempt to train her, he sent her a lengthy, intricate scenario that she was expected to follow precisely. He said that Delan had seen Laura alive and healthy, and that she was involved in cocaine dealing with Mark and Christina. Laura disappeared the next day after they left her and Mark alone. Although he hadn't wanted to notify the police, Mark informed Delan that she had overdosed after combining cocaine with prescription medication. As he would do at the conclusion of almost all of his letters, Dee's letter concluded, "Read this a couple of times, then destroy it immediately." The messages Christina had written and placed in her bedroom were discovered when she was taken into custody. Another was titled, "Limbs Ripped Off Without Music Hesitation," while another was titled, "Zen, My Sweet Serial Killer." Once again, Delan and Mark were convicted of Laura B.'s first-degree murder. They were both sentenced to life in jail with the possibility of release after 25 years. Like any parent who loses a child, we can only move forward with the thoughts of what might have happened, Laura's father said, admitting that the trial had seemed like a 6-week funeral. Music. Delan was found guilty of his third murder in connection with the death of his father in September 2018. As the decision was read, he grinned and fixed his gaze on the ceiling. Before he could seek for parole, he had to serve an extra 25 years, making his total sentence 75 years. In Ontario, it was the longest sentence ever imposed without the possibility of release. He would be 102 years old if he were still alive, but a legislative reform made Delan and Mark's 75 and 50-year parole in eligibility terms unlawful, and they were lowered to a maximum of 25 years. They may now apply for parole in 2043, but it remains to be seen whether they are granted it. Jackson, Matthew Ward. Another friend who pleaded guilty to 9 counts of gun ownership and trafficking received an 11-year sentence. The allegations included selling Delan a pistol that he used to murder his father and selling another gun that was used for shooting. In 2023, Tim Dell's and Mark's appeals of their convictions were denied. Dell again challenged his conviction for the murder of his father, but this was denied once more. These murderers were and still are entitled, conceited, and selfish. They will do whatever it takes to have what they want when they want it, even murdering lives, without hesitation or regret. If they hadn't been apprehended when they were, one has to wonder what may have happened next. Laura was putting a lot of effort into turning her life around. She was at last surrounded by kind individuals who really cared for her, like Shaw, but regrettably she was unable to overcome her need on Delan, whom she believed to be supportive and concerned about her. Tim just wanted to sell his vehicle in order to get some additional money and to start planning for a second child with his wife. Wayne, on the other hand, was very excited about the future of his company and was prepared to put his son on his own road, which would ideally make their relationship less strained and much stronger. In a situation like this, the only adjectives that spring to me are icy, heartless, self-centered, and completely nonsensical.